So our first speaker today is one of my best friends, Todd Norton. He's studied, he finished his PhD in maths at Caltech in California, one of the top universities there, before joining Manta as a cryptographer. Since then he's seen his way around a lot of cryptographic protocols and around a lot of zero-knowledge proof systems, which I believe is the topic for today. Welcome, Todd.
Great, well thank you. Can everybody hear me all right?
Yeah.
Excellent, excellent. Yes, my name's Todd. I'm a cryptographer with the Manta Network. I'm going to talk to you today about SNARKs, zero-knowledge proofs, and other things the NSA doesn't want you to know about. Before I begin, I'd like to thank our organizers for putting this together for us and giving me the chance to speak here. Yes. The goal for today is to cover two things. What is a ZK SNARK, and what can we use them for? And my personal goal is for everybody to understand what I say, okay? It will be really not technical. If you just listen, you will understand what I say, all right? So it doesn't have to be complicated. So to dive right in, ZK SNARK, that's an acronym, and it stands for Zero Knowledge, Succinct, Non-Interactive, Argument of Knowledge. So it seems like I'm breaking my first promise that you will understand me if you just listen. No, don't worry, this will get better. Right, if you try to find out a little bit more about that by perhaps looking in the literature, then you'll come across some rather unapproachable definitions of a ZK SNARK. It is not perhaps the easiest introduction to the concept. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just tell you a story. This is the story of the time that I invented ZK SNARKs. Okay. And it started during COVID. It started when we were all confined. And we all got a little bit weird, and I personally got obsessed with the Rubik's Cube. Okay? Everybody knows the Rubik's Cube, right? And can any of you solve the Rubik's Cube? Maybe by show of hands, are there a few? There's a few. Okay, nice. I cannot solve the Rubik's Cube, and I wish I could. I wanted to solve the Rubik's Cube so badly, I bought one, ordered it, and played with it for days, and just couldn't really get it to work for me. And so I got desperate, and I said, I'm going to hire a tutor to teach me how to solve the Rubik's Cube. Okay? So that's what I did. I went online. I posted an ad. I said, hello, I am very curious about how to solve the Rubik's Cube, and I will pay $100 to anyone who can teach me how to solve it. I got about 10 responses in the first 10 minutes, and I just picked the one that had the best grammar and said, okay, great, let's do this, let's meet up. And now this was confinement, so we had to meet up virtually, right? We were using Zoom. And they said, okay, sure, just transfer me the 100, and then we can start our lesson. I'll teach you how to solve the cube. I did it. Okay, I transferred them the 100, and we started our session, and it turns out that they just had absolutely no clue how to solve the Rubik's Cube. They were useless, just as useless as me at solving this cube. And so I had basically just burned $100 right there, and that was really annoying. And that was when I decided that I probably need to convince myself before transferring them any money that they actually know how to solve the Rubik's Cube, right? They ought to prove to me that they know how to solve the Rubik's Cube. And so this was when I started thinking about how I could enforce that condition, and this is what's ultimately going to lead me to invent ZK SNARKs. So the first thing I did was I just changed my ad. I said, before I transfer you any money, you'll have to send me a video of you solving the cube, right? This seemed like a reasonable request on my part. However, I quickly got responses to my ad of people saying, you must be crazy. I'm never going to send you a video of me solving the cube. You'll just watch the video, and then you'll learn from that how to solve the cube. They're not wrong, are they, right? I mean, it would be very silly to just give away your secrets like that when you want me to pay you for them. So we decided that we needed some way of them convincing me that they know how to solve the cube without actually teaching me how to solve the cube in the process. This is what ZK SNARKs are for, okay? So I'm going to start introducing a little bit of the terminology around ZK SNARKs. We're going to keep it really simple, okay? There's always a statement that you're trying to prove. And in this case, the statement was, I can solve the Rubik's Cube, right? There are always these two parties, a prover and a verifier. And the prover is the person with something to prove. So in this case, that would be the potential tutor who's going to teach me to solve the Rubik's Cube. And then there's a verifier who needs to verify their claim. And that was me, right? Trying to make sure that they can solve the cube. Then there will be some protocol, right? Some sequence of steps that we go through in order for them to convince me. And this was the big open question: is how do we design this, right? So that they can convince me of their knowledge without revealing it to me. So what we came up with was, I said, okay. You can just send me a video where you mix the cube up, and then you can lower it, below the camera and solve it, and then just lift it back up, right, and show me the solved cube. That seemed reasonable, and people were happy to do that. I got a few replies, fewer than the first time, right? I got a few replies, and I picked one of them, and I transferred them $100, and we started our meeting. And again, I got burned, okay? Yeah, seriously, they did not know how to solve the cube, right? How is this possible? They sent me this video of them mixing up a cube and then, doing some stuff off camera and then showing me a solved cube. To this day, I don't know, but I can only assume that what happened is they just had a stack of solved Rubik's cubes sitting on the floor off camera. So anyways, at this point, I'm $200 in the hole. I know nothing about solving the Rubik's Cube, and I'm really starting to think that this is just a dead end. Then I had an idea, and this one worked better. I said, okay, actually, if you can really solve the cube, and if you can really solve it well enough that you can teach me how to solve the cube, then you must be able to take it not just to the classical solution, right, where all the red and all the green and all the blue are together. Actually, you should be able to put the cube into any valid configuration that I want you to put it in, if you really, really know how to solve the cube. Those of you who raised your hands and said you could solve the cube, do you think that you would be up to that challenge? Do you think? No, nobody's as confident, right? It's obviously a lot harder, but I mean, if you're truly qualified, right, to solve the cube, then you ought to be able to do this. So I said, this is the new challenge, okay? I changed my ad and I said, if you would like to earn $100 teaching me how to solve the cube, then here's what you must do. And I took my own cube and I just mixed it up a bunch, and then I posted pictures of all 6 sides of the cube. And I posted that in my ad, and I said, anybody who can send me a picture of a cube that is in this configuration is qualified to be my tutor, right? Now you might say that, what if they just happen to have a cube that's in that configuration? Maybe they don't actually know how to do it. There's actually like tons and tons of configurations of the Rubik's Cube. It's like a billion configurations of the Rubik's Cube. So I figured that I'll just take that risk, right? It's very, very low probability that they could cheat me on this test. But I bring that up because it's actually a nice thing to recognize, is that when you maybe someday read about some of the real zero knowledge proof protocols, that you'll find that it is actually possible to get away with lying. It's just that it's unbelievably improbable that you would succeed, right? Far more improbable, in fact, in the ones that are used in practice, than that somebody would happen to have a Rubik's Cube that is in the exact random configuration that I came up with. So that was my ultimate solution to that problem, was to just mix up my cube, right? And that's the protocol that we came up with, and it worked, okay? The person who responded to my ad that time, they transferred me the money. Or sorry, I transferred them the money, and they actually did teach me how to solve the cube. They were the best Rubik's Cube tutor I've ever known, right? I didn't lie. That made sense, I think. Okay, but that really is actually a ZK snark. So why don't I go back to, well, it's not a snark. It's maybe a sark. I'll talk a little bit more about what we would want of a ZK snark when we're on a blockchain. Okay. So if we're trying to use this same concept where we have a statement, a prover, a verifier, and then some protocol, if we were trying to use that for a blockchain application, then what would our requirements be of that protocol to make it useful? Succinctness, that's the S. That's an obvious one because well, I should say what it means. Roughly, it would mean that the proof is small in some sense, and that the time it takes to verify it is short in some sense. And I won't give a more precise definition than that. And you can kind of see why those would be desirable properties for a blockchain application. The proof is going to have to be submitted to a chain, and that's costly, so we'd like it to be small. In my example, the proof was just pictures of a Rubik's Cube that they had in the right configuration. I call that reasonably small. My verification procedure, I think it runs in a pretty short time. I just have to compare, all of these 6 sides. So that's an obvious requirement. The N stands for non-interactive, and that's another important requirement for a blockchain because in this scenario, the verifier will be the ledger itself. And so we don't actually want to be in a situation where the verifier needs to give a challenge to the prover the same way that I did, right? I gave a challenge to the prover. I said, here's a configuration that you need to achieve. That actually is what we would call interaction between prover and verifier because messages went from me to the prover and then from the prover to me. That's undesirable. What you would actually like as a good zero-knowledge proof system for the blockchain is for messages to only go from prover to verifier, because verifier is not a person; it's a ledger, it's a blockchain. So that's the. I have a few ideas maybe for how I could make my protocol non-interactive. I won't go into them right now. You can think it over as well, and let me know during one of the breaks what you think would be the best way to do that. Remember, the remaining letters stood for argument of knowledge. That's pretty clear, right? That they've argued to me that they know how to solve this Rubik's Cube. And then the ZK, right? That was zero knowledge. That when people say zero knowledge, generally what they are referring to is this fact that the tutor did not teach me how to solve the cube when they proved to me that they could solve it, right? So there was zero knowledge that I could extract from their proof to help me solve the cube. That's what the ZK stands for. Now let's think a little bit about which statements would be more interesting than I can solve the Rubik's Cube. Obviously not a very useful statement for blockchain applications. Statements that would be of interest and that are of interest in real applications that exist right now are things like, I am the owner of 1 ETH, right? You can see how proving that might be useful in certain scenarios. I am a member of a DAO or some other community. Maybe it's like proving your citizenship in some country, or maybe it's proving that you have a degree from some institution, or I don't know. I have verified a batch of transactions, right? Is an approximate version of the statement that people use for scaling solutions using ZK SNARKs. Those first 2 have more to do with privacy, and that's the sort of side of this that I'm more familiar with because that's what we work in at Manta. And I would like to just wrap up by telling you about how we could use these ZK SNARKs to build a private payment protocol, right? By which I mean a way that I could transfer some money to Errol in a way that is both on-chain but also private, so that no one would know when they look at this transaction on the ledger, no one would know that it's me, the sender, Errol, the recipient, or even how much the transaction was for. So it sounds very hard to do, but it actually can be done, and there's a nice Well, I'm just going to give you an approximate explanation of how it works, okay? So, what we have before us, we have a bucket of pieces of paper, a big bucket, lots of pieces of paper. And these pieces of paper are notes that we call UTXOs in the business. Maybe you've seen this term before. What it stands for is unspent transaction output. What it says on it is what asset it contains, like maybe 1 ETH, right? And who owns it, like Errol's public address, something like that. This bucket is full of UTXOs. It's full of slips of paper that have some asset and some owner specified on them. Only the pieces of paper are encrypted, okay? So if you pick one up out of the bucket and look at it, you will not actually be able to decipher what asset and who owns it, okay? Unless, of course, you are the owner of that asset. In that case, you have secret keys that you could use to decipher that information. So we start with this big bucket, and I'm going to explain to you how we can actually transfer, how I could transfer some money to Errol using that. What I need to do is create a new UTXO, okay? So all the time, people are creating new UTXOs, and these are getting dropped in the bucket. And what I want to do to transfer, let's say I'm transferring 1 ETH to Errol, okay? What I want to do to transfer that to him is just put a UTXO in the bucket where the value is 1 ETH, the asset is 1 ETH, and the owner is Errol, okay? Obviously, there will have to be some rules around how I do this, otherwise it would be quite tempting to spend all day just throwing UTXOs in the bucket, creating money out of thin air, right? We can't allow that. So what we do is we demand, in order for you to create a new UTXO, that you provide a ZK SNARK proof of these statements. So these statements, I'll go through them in a second, but the thinking behind them is that they should make it impossible to spend resources that you do not possess, and it should be impossible to double spend a resource that you do possess. So the statements you need to come up with a proof for are, first of all, I own one of the UTXOs in this bucket. One of, not specifying which one actually, but it's possible to prove just that you own one of them. I have not spent that UTXO yet. That's to avoid double spending. That UTXO has the same value as the new one that I am creating. Makes sense? It's to avoid, creation of value out of thin air. I created the new one according to certain rules. You also have to prove that because the UTXO is encrypted, and so somebody just looking at it cannot actually tell whether you made it correctly or not. But it must be made correctly in order for Errol to be able to later spend it down the road when he wants to transfer some money to Morat, right? So you create a SNARK proof of those 4 statements. You submit that SNARK proof to the ledger, right? That might be the Manta Networks blockchain if you're using MantaPay. There's other protocols out there, right? Tornado Cash works about the same way. There's other protocols that do it like this. You submit this ZK SNARK proof to the chain. The chain checks its validity, and if that proof can be verified, then it will create a new UTXO and drop it in the bucket. And that UTXO belongs to Errol, right? And I have successfully transferred value to Errol. Right? The one that I used to create my proof, it is no longer usable to me because I would be unable to prove the second part of this statement. I would be unable to prove that I have not yet used it if I have already sent it to Errol. The way that this protects your privacy is this first statement. It's key to read it correctly, right? When you prove that you own one of the UTXOs in the bucket, you do not say which one you own, right? You just say that you own one of them that has not been used yet, okay? And so from the proof that you submit on chain, it's impossible for the ledger or anybody watching the ledger, which can be literally anybody, right? Including perhaps the NSA. It's impossible for them to look at that transaction you submitted to the ledger and figure out which of the UTXOs in the bucket you're talking about. Now that's important because if someday they figured out that it was the UTXO that was created in my transaction, then they would start to have some link, right, between me and Errol and maybe Timura on the chain. We don't want that. That would be a violation of our privacy, right? And so what we prove is just that we own one of the UTXOs in the bucket. I've talked a lot and I haven't stopped for questions. I should stop for questions perhaps more often. Are there any at this point? Yeah, Anthony.
Maybe this is getting too deep. Just at a high level, because I hear this terminology all the time, what's the difference between a SNARK and a STARK?
Could you repeat the question?
Good point, good point. Anthony asked for the difference between a SNARK and a STARK. And I'm not really even qualified to answer it. You know, we use SNARKs at Manta Network. We don't use STARKs. And is there anybody who does use STARKs? Why don't you raise your hand so that somebody could ask you about it later? STARKs are not popular in this room. All right.
I just know STARK.
Maybe we can talk about it and figure it out. It's different proving systems. You know, it's very similar in that there is still a statement prover and verifier. The protocol is totally different. That's where the difference is going to be. Right. All right. Thanks for the question. Sorry, I'm not more helpful. Others? Other questions? Yeah. Rob.
So you can prove all of these things because everything stays in the bucket, right? So you, for example, you want to send some money to somebody else. You're just adding another UTXO to the bucket.
Yeah.
And later on, you can't say statement number 2. So later, you can't say I have not spent that UTXO yet. So surely the bucket must get really full at some point.
Yes, Rob, if I could just repeat because the first half of it was cut off. Rob pointed out that we never take UTXOs out of the bucket because the ledger does not know which UTXOs have been spent, right? You submit a proof that doesn't tell which UTXO you're using, and so the chain cannot figure out which ones have been spent. It can never delete a UTXO from the bucket. So you're right, Rob, it's a damn big bucket. It's just very, very big, yeah. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah, Errol.
STARKs are SNARKs.
STARKs or SNARKs? Perfect. Okay, Anthony, STARKs or SNARKs? I think that's all I had for you. So thanks so much for listening. Feel free to approach me afterwards if you want to talk more about it or if you want to talk about what we do at Manta Network. Yeah, thanks for your attention.